At 12:04 a.m., a massive object struck the Novorossiysk defense grid. 3 radar sectors went dark, 2 coastal sensors froze, and the main tracking feed at Russia's Black Sea Fleet glitched so badly that operators thought the system had crashed. That alone was shocking, because Novorossiysk was one of the most protected military zones in Russia. It was guarded by 12 S-400 launchers, Pantsir batteries, and a layered naval radar system. Nothing was supposed to blind it, not even for a second. Yet here it was, losing sight of the Black Sea in real time. And before anyone inside the command center understood why, Ukraine's strike package was already inside the gap. This blackout on the radar was the first sign that something huge had started far from the Black Sea, so far that nobody in Novorossiysk even imagined the danger was already moving toward them. Hundreds of kilometers away, deep inside the Odessa region, a single camouflage truck waited in absolute silence. Inside the truck, the cabin lights were dim. A non-commissioned officer rested his hand on the red safety cover beneath the dashboard. Everyone around him knew that when his thumb pushed that cover open, there was no going back. Behind the truck, 4 long launch capsules stood upright. Each tube held one of Ukraine's most dangerous tools, the long-range land attack Neptune, not the anti-ship version people first heard about years ago. This was the upgraded model with extended range, reinforced airframe, and a heavy warhead designed for hardened land targets. On a small folding table, an engineer scanned the final lines of data on his laptop, like wind speed, surface pressure, Black Sea humidity, terrain-matching cues, and everything else needed to guide a missile through 600 kilometers of hostile airspace. In the top corner of the screen, 4 targeting profiles were blinking. 2 Neptune missiles hit the S-400 clusters of the Kuban regiment, and 2 Neptune missiles slam into the pump stations and tank farm at Sheskara's terminal. If the math held, Novorossiysk would lose both its shield and its fuel spine in the same hour. The commander stepped forward and gave the order. Then the countdown began. The lid of the first capsule blew open. A black shape surged upward. Then it tilted, turned, and disappeared toward the Black Sea. The second missile followed, then the third, then the fourth. From a distance, the missiles looked like 4 thin strokes fading into the dark sky, but each one moved at nearly 900 kilometers per hour. They flew low enough that radar beams sailed right over them. They were invisible for Novorossiysk. And yet, this attack was more than just 4 missiles gliding silently through the night. It was a full operation crafted to confuse one of Russia's most complicated defense networks. Because in the hills above Novorossiysk, the S-400 crews believed they were untouchable. Those 12 launchers formed a dome that Russia bragged about constantly. Their operators trained for jets, bombers, and high-flying cruise missiles, not for something crawling along the waterline like a shadow too low for the radar to bend toward. That weakness was exactly what Ukraine needed. As the Neptunes pushed closer to the Black Sea, another part of the mission activated. Swarms of FP-series kamikaze UAVs shot forward from different points along the coast. Each one had a job: to make the radar screen unusable. They flew at mixed altitudes, some at rooftop height, others slightly above tree level, some jumping hundreds of meters at random intervals. They kept switching altitude bands to break tracking patterns. The goal was not to hit anything. These UAVs were built for the radar picture, not the explosion. Inside the Kuban regiment's command shelter, the main operator leaned forward when the radar suddenly lit up in red. A clean radar picture turned into a swarm of dots. This wasn't supposed to happen. Software attempted to classify the shapes, but it failed. The operator tagged clusters as drones and others as cruise missiles, but the system couldn't decide what was real. Everything merged into one storm, and this was the trap. The Russian air defense crews reacted the way training taught them. Just shoot the largest, brightest cluster. Aim where the radar shows the thickest threat. But it was the wrong call. Those clusters were decoys. They were cheap, small, and perfectly expendable. But because they filled the upper and mid-level airspace, they blinded the S-300 and S-400 radars. They forced operators to burn interceptors on targets that didn't matter. Across the hills, the first Pantsir batteries fired rapidly. The S-300 units launched. Then the S-400s followed with their expensive interceptors. White trails sliced the sky, and there were explosions everywhere. Some Russian soldiers even recorded the scene, thinking they were watching a victorious defense. But every interceptor fired toward the decoys meant that no one was watching the waterline. While radar screens were drowning in red dots, the real threat moved along the dark surface of the sea. The Neptunes were inside the blind zone, the bottom edge edge of the radar envelope known as the dead band. Because of Earth's curvature, high-power radars cannot see objects flying extremely low over water until the final seconds. It's a natural blind spot. Russia had always known about this weakness. They never expected Ukraine to exploit it with missiles built for long-range land attacks. The Neptunes glided forward smoothly, each adjusting its course through INS/GNSS guidance. When jamming hit the Black Sea corridor, and it did, the missiles relied on internal sensors and terrain-matching algorithms. Their memory banks stored coastline shapes, elevation lines, and thermal differences between water and land. Even without GPS, they kept moving. Meanwhile, the FP drones continued to pester the Russian defense grid. Some dove straight into the radar lobes. Some hovered near coastal stations to distort the pattern. Others ignored the hills entirely and flew deeper inland to distract command nodes. By the time Russian software realized the density of the swarm didn't match the usual threat profile, it was too late. The S-400 crews had fired dozens of missiles but still had no picture of what was happening near the sea. Inside the command room, officers argued over the screens. One feed showed nothing but clutter, another was flickering, and the third one was frozen. They rebooted the systems twice. They tried to narrow the radar beam. They switched frequencies, but all they saw was noise. They didn't know that 4 missiles were already cutting across the last stretch of sea. They didn't know that the FP drones were just there to keep their attention high. They didn't know that the sky battle was a trick to open the door for the real strike. The Neptunes were not going to attack the air defense system from the air. They were going to crawl under it and tear it apart from below. The first missile approached the coastline and rose slightly, just enough to let its infrared seeker wake up and scan the hills. Hot silhouettes appeared instantly. The 96N6 radar spun like a beacon. The 92N6 tracking radar glowed a little brighter. 4 S-400 launchers parked together showed long, warm outlines. Everything the missile needed. And this was only the beginning of what Novorossiysk was about to face. The first 2 Neptunes crossed the coastline with quiet confidence, rising just enough to see the shape of the hills ahead. Their infrared seekers came alive at once. On the thermal feed, the landscape was not dark at all. It was glowing. The 96N6 radar tower spun like a bright circle. The 92N6 engagement radar was right beside it, and lower on the slope, 4 S-400 launch tubes stood in a neat line. To the missile's guidance system, this was not some random scenery. Every shape matched a pattern it had stored long before launch. The first Neptune adjusted its course by a small nose tilt, dipped low, climbed for a second, then plunged straight toward the cluster. For a breath, everything paused. Then the hillside tore open. The explosion punched downward, ripping through the radar deck first. The rotating head was thrown into the air and shattered into pieces. Those pieces rained down on the S-400 tubes beside it, cutting through wiring and igniting the missile fuel inside them. One tube reacted instantly, then the next. Soon, all 4 erupted in a chain of violent bursts. Each launch canister blew upward as if pressure was forcing the entire hill to breathe fire. Port workers watching from the coast saw the sky flash white before a growing fireball rolled upward behind it. That was only the first strike. The second Neptune struck its target moments later. This one aimed at the second S-400 cluster tied to the engagement radar. It hit with almost perfect accuracy. The blast ripped apart the generators first, then the radar cabin, then the launchers. More explosions followed as the stored missiles reacted to the heat. When the dawn images leaked, they showed that 4 S-400 launchers were gone. Both early warning radars were destroyed. The remaining launchers were still physically standing, but they had no guidance, no communication, and no functioning sensors. They were blind metal tubes in a burning field. With the shield broken, the other 2 Neptunes were already gliding in from the sea. Nothing tracked them, and nothing moved toward them. The defenders were too busy emptying ammunition into the drone swarm overhead. They were fighting the sky, not the waterline. That mistake opened the entire coast. The third Neptune skimmed the surface until the lights of the Shishkaris terminal appeared on its infrared feed. The tank area glowed as huge circles. The pumping stations beside them glowed even hotter. The missile scanned the patterns once, locked onto the pump complex, rose slightly, then dived like it had been dropped from above. The explosion hit the heart of the terminal. The shockwave shattered the manifold, the wiring rooms, the power racks, and the main control cabin. Fire rushed into the pipes and followed the lines deeper into the port. The fourth Neptune Neptune arrived seconds later. It went straight for the tank farm. The full tanks were easy for the infrared seeker to read. One of them glowed with a perfect heat shape. The missile chose it, committed, and dropped. The blast blew the top off the tank and sent a fire column straight into the air. Those two hits took away more than fuel. They removed the entire rhythm of the port. Without the pumps and the tank farm, almost every function of the terminal stalled at once. And while the fires spread, the next layer of the attack arrived. One drone landed on the roof of the energy control building. The blast shut down half the terminal, but the other half never received the shutdown command because the main panel had already been destroyed. Systems froze mid-sequence. Pumps that should have stopped kept running until the lines failed. Sparks jumped across panels that were never meant to stay live during a fire. The tank yard was hit with more secondary explosions as fuel leaked into the open flames. The container stacks shook from smaller blasts. A civilian ship nearby suffered damage from falling debris, injuring 3 crew members. When the first images hit social media, the world watched Russia's main Black Sea port burning in front of its own people. The Ministry of Defense rushed to claim that dozens of drones were shot down. They probably were, but the swarm that mattered had reached everything it needed to reach. By the time officials declared a state of emergency in Novorossiysk, the outcome was already clear. The Neptunes had cut through Russia's most protected coastal fortress in less than an hour, and the rest of the night only widened the damage. What do you think Ukraine's next military move will be? Let us know in the comment section below. And before you go, make sure to subscribe for more updates on this war. Goodbye for now.